Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Adventurers University. Now, so far we've talked about all kinds of things, suggestions that I've given on what to do and how to build the lore in your world. Today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to tell you a bit of advice on what not to do, specifically lore dumping, also known as info dumping or exposition. These things aren't necessarily bad, but generally speaking, people don't like being just talked at. When you are giving information, you don't want to just, oh, you don't know this bit of obscure knowledge? Let me tell you all about it for 20 minutes. If any of you have noticed people, their eyes rolling back in their heads, starting to lose focus, start playing their phones, whether it be a Dungeons and Dragons or other role-playing game, or someone listening to you tell your story and giving the background behind something, you're probably giving a little too much information. Now, again, it's not always a bad thing to give a whole bunch of information. It's just that a lot of people won't find that enjoyable unless they have a specific reason to want to learn that information. Take the Silmarillion. It is the lore dump of Lord of the Rings. It has tons of history. It's like the Old Testament to Lord of the Rings, actually, kind of literally, in a way. um, but so many people that I've talked to, at least, talk about how difficult it is to read it. Again, kind of part of that parallel to the Old Testament. A lot of people have a hard time reading through things like Leviticus and Numbers, Judges, because it's a lot of very specific, nitpicky stuff. This happened here, this happened there. Just, it's kind of dull for a lot of people. Some people eat it up, and there are people who will push through it so they can get to the actually interesting stuff. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about the Old Testament. It's great. I personally have a hard time with Numbers. That's me. I also have a hard time with Songs of Solomon. Uh, but the comparison is there in that the Silmarillion is really difficult for some people to read through because it's just so much information. It's written in a way that people aren't used to, and there's a lot of they beget this, these people did these things and ventured off. It's less structured for specific entertainment. It's just stories for the sake of it being a story. If you want to portray that to your players, or to deliver that to your players, you can do that. One great way to do it is to create a document, if it's just history, and you can make it readily available for your readers or your players, and that is the encyclopedia of these different things. So people who want to learn it can go and learn more about it. People who don't, they don't need to. That said, it is amazing how little information people actually need to get the gist of the story. For example, in Star Wars A New Hope, they mention the Clone Wars. No, my father didn't fight in the Clone Wars. He was a spice merchant. And then later in the message, Princess Leia is talking to General Kenobi. You fought in the Clone Wars with my father. That's all the information we get about the Clone Wars, and that the Jedi fought in it. So, who were they fighting? Was it clone versus clone? Was it clone versus another enemy? Was it Jedi versus clone? So, that information isn't really given in the New Hope, in A New Hope. But we learn about it later. This is where, especially in like role-playing games, note takers, people who pay attention to little details, can shine when this information becomes important later. You only share little snippets. Hey, there's the Clone Wars. It happened. People know about it. It's old history. And then later, you bring it up again. Oh, wait a minute. Clone Wars, Clone Wars. Let's flip through. That was where General Kenobi and Luke's father, they fought in the Clone Wars together as Jedi. And it becomes more interesting because it's stuff that people realize has been building up. You want to hold back some of the information so that you can then piece it out in give it out in bite-sized pieces, and that way your audience can just eat it up. I talked about before making your lore a reward for the players, making it more interesting. This is kind of what I was talking about. Actually, it's very much what I was talking about, where you hold back information that isn't immediately pertinent and you reward people for it. Oh, the Clone Wars. Interesting, but not right now. Stuff. Later, they need to learn some information, especially in a role playing game, or if you're doing stuff with a book, it's a quest situation. The item of which you seek is not here. It is buried beneath the battlefield where the clones fought against the Federation armies. Wait a minute. The clone. What is what is this? And then they start learning more information. Why do we need to care? Why do we need to go to this battlefield? Again, if they don't care about the Clone Wars, they just go to the battlefield, get the item, their MacGuffin or whatever, unearth it. Great. You can still piece in little bits and bobs. There's a tank here covered in moss, overgrown, decaying. You can see droids all over the place with skeletons mingled amongst them. Uh, you can, this is great flavor for any setting. And maybe the players or readers will be interested. Maybe they won't. Again, with the gauging interest, it's more for in-person stuff, but also applicable to readers. Um, when you introduce this information, if nothing else, it creates content, environment, things that you can throw at them at a moment's notice. But if you have already just spilled everything out all at once, you vomited this information at them early on, then hearing this information isn't really significant now. Like maybe it is a little bit, but they've already heard all the significant things. But they've only heard the name the Clone Wars, then later they hear about Battlefield and who the clones fought, and then now they are on the battlefield, they are exploring, trying to unearth things. They accidentally activate maybe some uh, droids that still have some oomph to them, uh, potentially allies, potentially zombie robot enemies. There's a few episodes like that in the show. Thought that was kind of weird, but whatever. They made it work. But again, it's when the players or readers get to these locations is when you reveal the next step of information. Whether it's just a little bit more in the sense of here's just there were droids in the battle too. And they had tanks, they had these things. You see this one that's kind of rounded and stuff. Describe that. And then maybe later it'll become even more important because of reason. And they maybe see a hologram of a battle where they can see the droidicas that uh, roll around and have their shield generators and are able to just obliterate locations. The massive armies of the clones facing off the massive armies of the droids, even more massive armies of droids, and the just sheer proportions of these. And then it can start revealing more and more and more. And then maybe eventually they'll be interested enough that you can have an entire book or campaign set around these. So again, I kind of focus on Clone Wars a little bit. This is more kind of sci-fi fantasy, but it's fantasy nonetheless. You can have this example with Lord of the Rings too. Um, with the One Ring, you learn little bits and pieces for the first little bit. Then you learn everything and whatever. Um, but let's say the elves. We know about Legolas. He came from Mirkwood. And then later we learn about the other elves in, I can't remember the name, uh, but they stop there, and that's where the elves. You learn in the movies the elves come and fight with them in Helm's Deep. In the books, they are doing other things to harass and impede the progression of evil. Um, but you learn little bits and pieces about the elves, their history, their lore, as Legolas and Gimli talk to each other. Same with the dwarves. Gimli shares things about the dwarves. Little bits of banter that they throw at each other just reveals more about themselves and more about their culture. And it's a way to make the story feel deeper and more rich because it just has a pool of knowledge that doesn't dry up. So, whether it's just for flavor content or for rewards, don't just throw everything at your players. Make sure that they want it, that it's needed information, and that it's interesting to them. You don't want to bore your readers or players because that's a good way to lose them. And that's all for today. Let me know in the comments if this was helpful for you. Let me know if there's anything that I missed about not sharing lore or giving expositions. Uh, Tell me your best experience with this sort of thing in the comments below. And if you are enjoying this content, please like and subscribe, and do ring that notification bell so you can hear when I post new videos each week. Also, I want to give a shout out to my Patreon patrons over on Patreon. Uh, if you want to become one of them, go to patreon.com/Adventurers University, and you can select one of the tiers and help me keep the lights on so that I can continue doing this to help all of you with these different bits of information. But yeah, until next time, have fun.